Hey everybody, so today we're going to look at the 5 shifters of demand along with some examples. So our first shifter of demand is change in income. Right, so when we're talking about income, we have 2 goods. We have normal goods, and we also have inferior goods. Right, so for normal goods, when income increases, the demand for the normal good increases as well, right? Because normal goods you can think are things like organic food or some nice cars, right? So if your income goes up, your demand for those goods are going to go up as well. And it goes the other way around, right? If income decreases for a normal good, or if your income decreases, your demand would also decrease for a normal good. Right, and then we have inferior goods. So these are things like top ramen, that will, have like kind of don't have a lot of value to you, right? It's just things that you eat because it's cheap rather than rather than you actually wanting it. It's because it's cheap, right? For top ramen. So when we're talking about inferior goods, right, when your income increases, demand for an inferior good decreases. Right, so you can see these have a direct relationship, right? Income goes up, demand goes up for a normal good. For inferior goods, income goes up and demand goes down. So these have an indirect, right? One goes up, the other goes down. Okay, and then the second factor that shifts demand, this is prices of related goods, right? So we have 2 types of related goods: substitutes and complements. Right, so substitutes are 2 goods for which an increase in the price of one leads to an increase in the demand for the other. Right, so these are 2 goods for which an increase in the price of one leads to an increase in the demand for the other. Right, so if 2 goods are substitutes, you see them as they're worth the same to you, right? You don't have a preference over one or the other. So if the price of one of those goods increases, then that's going to increase the demand for the other, right? Because the first one is expensive now, so you'd rather buy the cheaper one if you don't have a big preference to which one. Right, and then another type of related good is complements. Complement goods, right? So these types of goods are 2 goods for which an increase in the price of one leads to a decrease in the demand for the other. Right, so an increase in P of 1 leads to a decrease in the demand for the other, right? So an example of complement goods that you're going to see is printers and ink, right? So if a price of one of those increases, well, it's going to decrease the demand for the other, right? Because you can't have ink without having a printer, right? So an increase in the price of one leads to a decrease in the demand for the other. Okay. These are the 2 big ones, right? Make sure you're comfortable with these ones. The third one is changes in taste or preference, right? So this is just as simple as, do you prefer Nikes over Adidas, right? Whichever one you prefer is going to have a higher demand. Right, number 4 This one is future expectations. Future expectations, right? So this means that if you expect future prices to increase, your current demand would increase, right? So if we expect higher prices in the future, demand will increase today. Right, because you know it's cheaper today. It's going to be more expensive in the future. So you'd rather buy it now when it's cheaper. Number 5, this is the number of buyers in the market, right? So basically, what this is saying is more buyers equals more demand. It's as simple as that. Right, so make sure you're comfortable with 1 and 2. Those are going to be the big ones. Okay, let's do an example. Okay, so example, Coke and Pepsi are substitute goods. What happens to the demand for Pepsi if the price of Coke decreases, right? This is decreases, it's a little bit cut off. Here we go. Okay, so let's start by drawing the 2 graphs for both of these goods. Right, so here's our Coke market, right? Here's our Pepsi market. Demand curve, downward sloping for both, right? All right, so we're given that they're substitute goods, right? What happens to the demand for Pepsi? We're given that the price of Coke decreases, right? So let's label that here, right? So price of Coke goes from PA to PB, right? So it's the price decreasing, and that is shown along the line here, right? So we know that the quantity demanded for Coke increases the quantity demanded, right? Because we're moving along the line, right? Price decreased, we're moving like along the line here. We're not shifting or anything, right? Because the only thing that causes a movement along the curve is a change in the price of the good, right? So the price of Coke decreased, which means we have a change in quantity demanded, right? An increase in quantity demanded due to the decrease in price, but it's asking us what happened to the demand for Pepsi, not Coke, right? Since they're complement goods, we know that if Coke suddenly got cheaper, right? So that means that the demand for Pepsi is going to go down, right? Because now you know that Coke is cheaper, so people are going to be buying Coke instead, right? The quantity demanded for Coke increases, which, right, because of this price decrease in Coke, decreases the demand for Pepsi, because Pepsi is now more expensive to the buyer. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's look at another example using printers and ink as an example of complement goods. All right, so printers and ink are examples of complement goods. What happens to the demand for ink as the price of printers decreases? Right, so let's draw our graphs one more time. Try to fit it on here. There we go. All right, so we've got printers and ink, right? So we're going to label here printers. This is going to be ink. Downward sloping demand curve. Right, so we're given here the price of printers decreases. Right, so once again, PA, PB. Right, price at A, price at B, right? So price of printers decreased. Again, we have a movement along the curve, right? Because the only thing, again, that causes a change in quantity demanded or movement along the curve is a change in the price of the good. We had a decrease in the price, therefore it's going to be a movement along the curve, right? For printers, we're not shifting the curve. So what happens to the demand for ink? What happens here in our ink market as the price of printers decreases? Well, we know that they're complement goods, right? So printers are cheaper, meaning people are going to be buying more printers most likely, and then they're going to also need more ink, right? So the demand for ink increases because printers are now cheaper, right? Remember the definition for complement goods are they're two goods for which an increase in the price of one, right? In this case, a decrease in the price of one leads to a decrease in the demand for the other. In this case, an increase for the demand for the other, right? Hopefully that makes sense.